Hi, everybody. I'm Randy Bach, and today's April 8th, 2024. All even numbers, I guess. And I'm happy to have a couple of my great guys. We're going to be an odd number today. Daniel Jupp from the UK and Scott McKay from is Louisiana still in the United States?
More or less.
Okay. So these guys are interesting writers. They write with flair, and both are authors. I'll let them discuss their topics. But Daniel has written recently on Bill Gates, the Gates of Hell or the Hell of Gates, either way. And Scott has Obama, Racism, Revenge, and Ruin, if I'm not mistaken, on the alliteration. So I don't know who goes first. Maybe we'll go alphabetically. Daniel.
Yeah, well, I'm from working class background, English, obviously, but I've always been interested in US politics as well. So I studied US politics at uni. I went on to a PhD. I was, the first from a working class background, so the first person in my family to go to uni. And that's where I kind of first encountered these radically different ideas to the ones that I'd been raised with. But my kind of focus has mainly been, I suppose you'd call me a populist. I used to be a conservative, and then I got a bit tired with how weak they've been culturally and in the culture wars. And I'm considered a populist these days. And I've been commenting politically online for about 10 years.
Scott?
Well, my background, I guess, goes back a little bit further than Daniel's in that I've been doing the Hayride, which is a culture and politics site based in Louisiana that covers mostly Southern current events since 2009. I've been writing a column at the American Spectator since 2012, started writing books, novels first beginning in 2019. I've got two political books, The Revivalist Manifesto, which came out in 2022, and Racism, Revenge, and Ruin, It's All Obama, which came out last year. Got a brand new novel out called King of the Jungle, which is a satirical action adventure war story that's going to be out at Amazon on April 12th. And has been serialized at the American Spectator over the past 10 weeks.
Lovely. So I'm going to start with populism versus conservatism. I think that's an interesting point. And Scott, you were commenting recently on Governor Jeff Landry's forays and the kind of the divide in Louisiana politics, which my understanding is gloves off usually,
has been in this case, yeah. Well, let me give you sort of the quick background of the controversy, and this is one that might very well start to play out in various, particularly red states across America. So and it just finished last night. The women's college basketball tournament was going on, and LSU's women's team played Iowa, who ended up being the national runner-up. And based on sort of the way they do event management for their games, they were not on the court for the playing of the national anthem. It wasn't a protest or anything like that. It's actually a sort of a normal thing for LSU sports teams in football and basketball to be in the locker room while the national anthem is played. This was a very rare thing that Iowa was actually on the floor for the national anthem when LSU wasn't, the outrage is the game management or event management people at the tournament that would put one team on the floor and the other one not. If LSU wasn't going to be there, Iowa shouldn't have been there because it's bad optics for the tournament. Anyway, this national hue and cry ensued about how unpatriotic LSU's team was that they weren't out there for the national anthem. And of course, Kim Mulkey, who's the coach of LSU's women's basketball team after the game, who had just lost an NCAA tournament game and her season was over. So you're not going to get a sunny, positive answer to a question about why wasn't your team out there for the national anthem. She's real nonchalant about it. It's like, we even asked me that question for, right? And she's like, I don't know. We never were out there for the national anthem. And that didn't diffuse the controversy. So Jeff Landry, who was elected last year as the governor of Louisiana, puts out a statement. I love Kim Mulkey, she's great, all this kind of stuff. We should have our teams, the public colleges in Louisiana, our team should be standing for the national anthem at sporting events. Like, he put that out. And he has been eviscerated for sticking his nose into the controversy. But, I saw through what was going on, which was, I think, something that Daniel, will probably identify with pretty seriously, which is Landry saw an opportunity to turn the ratchet, right? You have these people on the left who constantly turn the cultural racket away from, the three things that Antonio Gramsci 120 some odd years ago wrote down were the reasons why the proletarian revolution didn't happen in Western countries, which was Christianity, nationalism, and charity, right? They're always turning the ratchet against those things. Well, Landry saw an opportunity to turn the ratchet back, which is, no, we're going to have some nationalism, right? We're going to put our publicly funded college sports teams on the field or on the court for the national anthem. It's something that the majority of the people in our state would prefer to have. It adds to the spectacle. It's a unifying thing. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to do it. Everybody, assumed that this was a punishment of Kim Mulkey and her team. But, it had nothing to do with that. It's an opportunity to turn the ratchet. And the way I wrote about this situation last week was, okay, think of every time there's a mass shooting and left-wing politicians come out of the woodwork to grab at the guns, right? This is their opportunity to turn the ratchet. Oh, we need to do something about all these guns because look what happens. And in every single case, these mass shooters, whatever they might be, would not have been deterred by whatever legislative program these guys offer up. We need better background checks and whatever. Okay, none of these people are felons. They wouldn't have been caught up in a background check. The only way that you're going to get the gun out of their hand is to take it out of all the life or the law-abiding people's hands. Which is never going to work, especially not in the United States, where that's patently unconstitutional and you can't do it. They don't care. They want to turn that ratchet. And so Landry is the term I use, and I don't know if it's a term that applies past the United States, but the term I use rather than populist as a different ideological base than conservatism is revivalism. Right? I don't want to conserve much of anything because I think the status quo sucks. And what I would like is to turn things back to a time where it worked a little better. Like in the United States, we're talking about the 80s and 90s, which, when I grew up, you had a much more unified, much more patriotic, much more free society, much more capitalistic society that wasn't an oligopoly like our current economy is. And that's not true just in the United States. It's true all over the West. Part of this is you need politicians who are not the namby-pamby, weak-kneed conservatives that don't want to do anything to actually fight the left on their own turf. Landry's willing to take the slings and arrows from people like, oh, you shouldn't be getting involved in cultural controversies about things like the national anthem. And his response is, no, these are publicly funded colleges that the state of Louisiana funds. The state of Louisiana is absolutely in a position to dictate how we're going to do the spectacle of the national anthem. I say the players should be on the field or on the court. And guess what? I'm the governor. All these people at the boards of regents of these universities, they're my people. And I can tell them what to do. And so they're going to make sure, starting in August and September, when the next academic year begins at all of these colleges, that when the national anthem plays, the players are all standing there. Because at the end of the day, you don't have a right to be a scholarship athlete at a college. that's a privilege. That's something that's afforded to you based on your athletic ability and character and whatever else. And when the rule gets made, hey, you're going to stand here for the national anthem, you stand there, or else you lose your scholarship, because they're serious about enforcing it now. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have this controversy here in Louisiana. My guess is that when Landry prevails on this and creates this requirement, every other state in the South certainly will do it. And a lot of other red states in places like the Midwest and the Rocky Mountain states and so forth will do it as well. And then, you're going to have a turning of the ratchet back to the right. And I think Landry should get a lot of credit for that, particularly sticking by his guns when a lot of people who voted for him are freaked out and screaming because they don't recognize the big picture here.
I like a lot. So there's a lot of things stand out from what you said, and I'd like Daniel to address some of them. But sticking to your guns is a great phrase to end that with. And in the middle, there's namby-pamby conservative, which I think is that Rishi Sunak's middle name? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it would apply directly to people like Rishi Sunak in the UK, who is, our equivalent of a globalist, a rhino, So, but I think there's several points there that are very valid and, need discussing. The first I'd say is that there's been this instinct on the right for a very, very long time to be embarrassed about being the right, and and not to defend themselves, not to forcefully put across their views, and to kind of accept the premises of the other side as the starting position, as the position that every reasonable moderate person would accept. And it's very, very evident now that people have got tired of that. And ordinary people have got tired of that, which is why there's a groundswell of populism and there's a groundswell of support for people like Trump, because we want plain language. We want a return, a revivalism of the values that we knew when we were children, or that our parents knew. And we're no longer content with leaders who allege to be that they are on the right, but essentially accept every left-wing premise, and especially every left-wing social value. We don't accept that anymore. And the whole kind of problem for globalism is that these left-wing social values became the standard values of the ruling class and the political and media class. And they all became indoctrinated in those things, including the business class. The business community were probably the last to step on board, but they have really stepped on board now, which is why you get corporations and companies and investment banks being the most significant pushers of radical leftist theory and ideology. That's why you've got diversity, equity and inclusion, because investment banks are pushing it, and because businesses don't get loans to do what they want to do from investment banks unless they sign up to DEI. And that's an invisible lever of power that, like the lever of power which represents cultural values, the right abandoned long ago and got embarrassed about fighting for. And now we're seeing a beginning, thankfully, of people who are no longer embarrassed about being on the right and wanting to fight the kind of radical policies that the left has put forward. And that's really good, but it has to be done in an organised fashion. And I think the really important thing about Landry's stance that was being described there is that if other politicians get on board with this, or if there's a groundswell of MAGA-type politicians who say, yes, we will seize that ratchet, we will seize that unacknowledged lever of power that is culture, and we will try and push it our way for a change. The more and more that happens, the more and more the globalists are in trouble, because they've had things their own way for a very long time.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you about globalism versus nationalism. We'll decide who takes the first bite at this. But people hate nationalism these days. I'm on the left. In the UK, I think it's almost kind of a crime to put out the Union Jack, even though the UK is not nominally part of the EU. I've had friends from Europe come over here time to time. We most recently had a German MD friend, and he and his daughter around, and look at the neighborhood. We have an American flag outside our house, and like, wow, don't you get trouble for into trouble for having that flag outside your house? And a few people in the neighborhood, it's like, you must be in like a radical conservative area. It's like, actually, no, this is Massachusetts. No,
But I
but
think that was one of the things that worked incredibly well about Americanism. The fact that wherever you came from, if you were in an immigrant background, you would run up your American flag and be proud of it. That is a unifying thing, as Scott says. That national identity is a unifier. But what we let happen since World War II is that we let nationalism be smeared with Nazism. And it was Marxist historians doing this, and they controlled the narrative, and they were writing the school textbooks, and the people writing our school textbooks were Marxists. It goes back to Gramsci, and it goes back to, various academics who were responsible for this. In Britain, one of the most influential was a guy called Hobsbawm, and he was linked to the Labour Party. He was a godfather of a previous Labour Party leader. And these were the school textbooks when I was growing up. The school textbooks were written by self-declared Marxists. And they were never really questioned on Marxism and its record of mass murder. It happened with Hobsbawm about once I ever saw in an interview, where he was asked about the number of people who'd been killed in communist slaughters around the world. And his reply was that essentially you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, and that you're going to get that happen. And he wouldn't put a figure on the top number of people. How many people must die before you say that this system is wrong? And he would say, well, the system that's going to follow is going to be better, so I'm not putting a figure on it. So what that essentially means is that people who are writing our school textbooks thought that any number of deaths would be okay to create a socialist utopia. And they were hugely influential. And they took this idea that nationalism is Nazism, and they pressed it into every school they could, every college, every university. And that's one of the biggest problems we've had. And that's, they then co-opted race as, a shortcut to grievance, because class wasn't working for them. They found that the actual working class, people who have a mortgage to worry about, people who work in blue collar industries, they weren't that bothered about highfalutin academics telling them that they were oppressed. They just wanted to get ahead. And, in America, they saw a system where they had an opportunity to get ahead. In the UK as well, to a slightly lesser extent, because of the class system. But they still saw that actually a lot of this stuff the academics were saying wasn't really their lived experience, if you like. And they were far more instinctively conservative than left-wing academics hoped they would be. So that what we saw then is that the left abandoned the working class and didn't want to represent them anymore. And they are fine with the working class when they can give a romanticized image of them, and they're fine with them when they can use them as a label by which to gain power for themselves. But they don't really care for the real working class. And in fact, they consider them deplorables, and if you look at it on a class basis, the higher you get up the social scale, the more these insane academic ideas of self-hatred are prevalent, and the more powerful they are. And if you look at something like, voting for Trump, or something like voting for Brexit in the UK, it's class divided. And you'll get wealthy people that buck that trend, and you'll get poor people that buck that trend. But generally, there is a class division on who supports what. And, it's been expressed by other people as the somewheres and the nowheres. The higher you get on the social scale, the more likely you are to consider yourself a citizen of the world, with no loyalty to your particular place and people. And the lower down you are, the more likely you are to be loyal to the kind of the old values and the old criteria by which goodness essentially was judged, which includes Christianity. And you know, the higher up you are, the more you want to destroy all those things and create something better. And the lower down you are,
something
the more you want to preserve what little
better.
you've got.
Yeah, now that's a great exegesis, and you know, it's an amazing phenomenon. You know, Charles Murray wrote a book, Coming Apart, where he had this he kind of limbed this same divide. The upper levels, the elites, the John Kerrys, you know, somebody else called it the hamburger theory, where the two tops of the bun are both fluffy. The top and the bottom of the bun represent the left, and they're kind of fluffy, and the real meat is in the middle, which is the working class and so forth, and the top is thinking they're helping the bottom. And Charles Murray kind of points out the irony in this, that the elites themselves actually live by the code that they abjure. They kind of have their kids stay at home. They don't have excessive partying. They don't have their kids do drugs. They have them all go, you know, stay in school, blah, blah, blah. They go through college. And their own lives are more married, you know, stable, so forth. They're acquisitive. They invest, blah, blah, blah. And they propound and promote all these contrary aspects for the working class, who live by the treatise, the remains of all these things they throw out there. So there's got free needles and you know, condoms in the schools and all this kind of stuff, and kind of this free love, whatever. And they wind up having broken homes. So they aspire, oddly enough, to the same ideals that the left lives by, while the left, you know, kind of has the contrary. And I just kind of put one other point.
Well, it's always, isn't it? It's always, these rules are for you, not for me, and that's a, you know, a definition of elitism. And you know, we saw it. That for me, the really stunning thing about all the COVID stuff was you know how you saw this almost feudal set of attitudes, where you saw people being served by servants who are masked whilst they are unmasked, you know, and it was incredibly obvious, and it's a great irony that the people who think they're socialist and the people who think that they're going to be leveling things are the worst elitists on the planet. And you know, they're the people who don't want to hear a single thing that an ordinary person has to say.
Well, it's almost an axiomatic thing that the most doctrinaire socialists out there, or communists, are the most misanthropic people that you can find. I mean, Mao Zedong hated the Chinese people with a colossal passion. And, you know, I mean, the guy was a pure psychopath. And, you know, his history is very, not very well known in the West at all. What people do have a little bit of an inkling about him was, you know, it came from the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where, you know, I mean, you want to talk about misanthropist. The guy talks about, we need to get rid of the four olds, and the four olds were, you know, ideas, culture, habits. Like, in other words, the way everybody lives their life has to change. I'm not just going to run the government. I'm not just going to run the economy. I am going to reach down into your brain, and I'm going to rewire it on pain of death. And before you die, I'm going to drag you on a stage in front of a bunch of screaming maniac idiots, and I'm going to make you repudiate your entire life, and then I'll beat you to death, or I'll throw you into a gulag somewhere. You're going to cut down trees until you drop dead. And, you know, I mean, was it 30, 40 million people that they killed in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, on top of a massive famine that was the Great Leap Forward, where he attempted to completely destroy China's economy and replace it with a pure communist thing. I mean, this guy murdered more people than anyone else in the history of the world. Okay. And there are people that will still tell you that Chinese communism is the most successful system going on the world stage today. And it's like, okay, but to have that opinion, you have got to hate human beings. Like, you have got to hate humanity. And of course, they do, because these are the same people that want to talk about global warming all day long. Climate change is the reason why we have to do all of these different things that will make people's lives harder to live, inconvenience them more, make them far less safe. They don't care. It's for the planet. It's like, well, okay, but none of the assumptions that you claim to justify all of this behavior and these policies and these not best practices, none of these assumptions actually hold water, right? Sea levels are pretty much what they were in 1500. There's very little that where there's difference in the shoreline mostly is coastal erosion caused. It's not that the waters are rising; the waters are the same. Temperature. I've yet to.
You don't buy kind of seafront $15 million mansions if you think that the sea levels are going to rise massively, which they all do.
I had a post.
I would love for Greta Thunberg to explain to me why it is they call it Greenland. I would love for her to explain that. She's Scandinavian. She should be very well versed in the history of Greenland. Why do they call it Greenland? Is it because it used to be green? Like when the people first found the place, it was green. They had fields and they had trees. They had all these different things. And they said, maybe we should move here. It's supports agriculture and all that. Now, Greenland's not very green. Greenland is white as snow because that's all you get in Greenland. So, like, what happened there? How come England used to be where everybody made wine, and now they don't make so much wine because it's not hot enough to make wine? What happened with that? They can't explain any of this stuff. They also can't explain why more people die every year of cold-related things than heat-related things. They make a big deal, like in Europe, if there's a heat, we had all these thousands of people die. It's like, yeah, and that's a fraction of the people who die every winter because it's too cold, right?
Yeah,
they never explain
that. The famous one is the ice shelf, and there's going to be nowhere for the polar bears, and the ice shelves are melting, and
there's more
that's
polar bears now than ever.
Yeah, we have more polar bears, and we have bigger ice shelves. The biggest they've been for 26 years, I think, was the latest report. So, all of this stuff is based on nonsense, and all of this stuff is representative of the co-option of science by billionaire interests who simply pay these people to say whatever they want them to say.
Yeah. So I'm going to say,
which is one of the elements.
As far as paying people, to do what they want. I was just going to mention I had a post taken down on Facebook that showed the Statue of Liberty, 150 years ago, and then currently. And I don't think they've changed the building or whatever. And the water line's at the same level. And that post got taken down, just blitzed, totally taken down. You can't repost it, and your Facebook thing. So to get on,
you only need censorship if you're lying, as well. This is a very simple point that very few people make. The whole concept of disinformation and misinformation only arises because the mainstream started lying so much. And it's because they lie so much that alternative media develops and people do what we're doing here. And it's because they have lied so much that people no longer trust them and no longer trust their, paid for controlled experts. So then, knowing that you're no longer trusted, you have to find some other way of controlling the narrative and controlling the information flow. And that's through tyrannical methods of suppression of freedom of speech, which is what is the big movement now. But it's all based on the fact that they lied so much in the first place. If you take something like climate change, Scott's absolutely right that this is about misanthropy, but it's also about profit and power, because these people hate the ordinary human being, and they're quite comfortable because of that in blaming the ordinary human being for the condition of the planet if they really believe it. Some of them really believe it, and some of them are just on that bandwagon, because if you have these very radical ideas and you think a huge disaster is coming, then that requires very radical steps to respond to it. And those radical steps mean a complete reordering of your energy requirements, the food requirements, the food chain. Everything gets reordered. And in that reordering, if you control it, you can reorder it to be much more profitable to you individually. And that's the appeal to the most of the billionaires behind it. Even while, you know, someone who's a climate protester will sincerely believe this stuff, whereas someone on top who's funding it will be funding it for the purpose of their own profit and power.
Yep, that's correct.
So
the dynamic, I like to call it villagers and pillagers. And Randy, you've heard me talk about this before. I mean, this is a story as old as time, right? The villagers are, you know, the butchers and the bakers and the candlestick makers and the farmers and all these people who earn a living by creating wealth, which is a very hard thing to do. It requires an enormous amount of innovation and hard work and creativity. And all of these different things to create value from that which has none. And, you know, so what you find is it's very hard to keep that going when the pillagers show up, which, you know, they used to manifest themselves as Mongols on horseback with swords and torches, where they would burn the village down and carry off the women and children as slaves and make off with as much swag as they could get their hands on. Civilization was founded to make it easier to be a villager than a pillager. Problem is, the pillagers just changed their tactics. Instead of learning how to do really well with swords, they went to law school. And so now, if you have a nonprofit and an ad budget and a few media organs, you know, you can go right back to pillaging like the days of old, and get the villagers to actually agree with you, which is far more sophisticated than perhaps it used to be. Although some of the same motivations developed. The villagers tended to pay lots of tribute to the pillagers to save their own skins. And I think that's a lot of a good explanation for what's happening with the climate change thing, particularly with corporate America and some of these other institutions that are trying to be eaten last. They'll throw in with the climate change narratives, even though they don't believe in them, just because it's like, what's too much trouble to fight it. And so this dynamic has not changed in thousands of years. It's, you know, the game may be a little different, but it's fundamentally the same. And that tells me, you know, we are in need of a revivalism rather than a conservatism, because the status quo is completely unsustainable. The people who, who held themselves out there as the conservatives, all they did was give ground. They retreated for decades. And now, it's actually maybe one of the good things is you have people like the Dave Rubins and the Barry Weisses and the Joe Rogans and the Elon Musks, who always saw themselves as, you know, center left, I guess. And they're firmly on the side of the conservatives because the left has run away and left them. They look around and say, I didn't really like these guys before, but now they're my only friends.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you have an opportunity to build a big tent for a revivalist type of movement in all of these Western countries. I think you're starting to see it.
Okay, so
where people are so fed up with the idiocy of the left and the corrupt ruling class that subscribes to their nostrums, and you have an opportunity to start rolling it back. But it takes people with enough sand to actually do it, rather than talk about doing it and then shine everybody on and then go do a deal with the elite left like they've always done. That's
I'll give you
one of the reasons Ron DeSantis had so much trouble is people they couldn't quite trust him as an honest broker, as a revivalist conservative, whereas Trump was a guy that had established some bona fides as somebody that, hey, he actually will fight this fight. I think DeSantis is fighting in Florida, but nobody will be trusted by regular folks until probably until they've suffered some for their beliefs. Because at this point, that's really the only currency that the right has left is suffering.
Well, I was going to segue a little bit. I know there's a lot here to cover, but we're heading towards 3/4 of the hour.
Can I just mention one thing very quickly in response to that, though?
Sure.
Because it occurred to me that there's already been a revivalist movement, and it was in the 1980s. You know, Thatcher described herself as a radical conservative.
Yeah.
You know, and and that was the only time. The mistake of Reagan and Thatcher is that they didn't fight the culture war. They left that ground and they were concentrated on defeating the Soviet Union, which is a very noble task, but they were concentrated on that and winning the economic argument. And the right did win the economic argument at that stage under Thatcher and Reagan. Right. But, you know, both of them were people who, by their personal example, made it very clear that they knew what were the decent values that would function best for society. But they didn't use that ratchet as the left does. They didn't try and impose those values on everyone else. And that was the error. But there was you know, if you look at a headline during the Falklands War, the Sun newspaper ran a headline reading "The Empire Strikes Back" for, you know, for the British actually finding their balls again and fighting the Falklands War, you know, and we had that brief moment where we had someone in charge who said, no, I'm not listening to what the experts tell me is acceptable. I'm not listening to any kind of weakness. These people are under the protection of the British government. They've been attacked. We are acting.
Right.
And that's a very different thing to the kind of perpetual war for profit that we see under, you know, neocon leadership.
I'm gonna just,
and it was a moral thing. It was a moral war.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm going to to kind of talk about the moral wars we have right now. There's Ukraine and there's Israel.
Randy, before you do that, can I interject something real quick?
Sure.
At least, and I don't feel confident enough to speak to Thatcher, although I think this is also true of her. The problem with the sort of revival of the 80s, at least on this side of the pond, I think, was that Ronald Reagan was not able to build a train behind him. So, you know, you went from Reagan to Bush, and the Bushes dominated the Republican Party for the next 30 years and rolled back everything Ronald Reagan had done, and took the Republican Party back to something that Republicans couldn't stand. And that I think is the reason why, like, and when I wrote the Revivalist Manifesto, I said, you need an entire generation of leaders that trains another generation of leaders behind them so that you can sustain this for 30, 40, 50 years of rolling back the left's abuses. Because if you don't have that, they will turn that ratchet back.
It's amazing. It's amazing how similar it's been in the two countries, because, you know, exactly the same happened in the UK. You had John Major follow, and then Tony Blair. You know, and Tony Blair was like, you know, one of your main subject matters, Obama, in that they were both incredibly radical people who pretended to be the moderate centrists. And incredibly radical what they did. And, you know, Biden is now doing to your borders what Tony Blair did to ours. And you know, that whole kind of mass migration as a weapon against ordinary people and against nationalism and patriotism, that, you know, these were rolled out by radical people who sold themselves as moderates.
Right. So the question I'm trying to get in is about Ukraine and Israel, but I'm going to stick to Israel right now because there's the Hamassacre, October 7th, and right now we basically have the capitulation or the usurpation of the kind of the moral aspect of the war, and you know, this I think it comes down to kind of what you were talking about, you know, pillagers and villagers. I think the villagers are more on, you know, Israel, and clearly the villagers were killed by the pillagers in rapid Mongolian, you know, Mongols fashion. so forth, a very ancient kind of thing, and the whole ethos of the Islamist movement is ancient, and that's kind of a conservatism of a sort. But we in the car last night we were talking about the derivation of the term third world. People think it means poverty. It doesn't mean. It was the first world, which is kind of like the Thatcher Reagan concept, the capitalist world, free market, so forth, freedom. And then the second world was Soviet, China, so forth, communist world. The third world was India's kind of positioning kind of on a socialist edge to kind of get stuff from both sides and not be party to the Cold War per se. But this, third world is different now. And the third world, whatever you want to call it, is kind of leaking or bleeding into Europe and the first world. So we're getting a blurring of these numbers and the concepts and so forth. And as far as these played out, can there be a moral imperative if the underpinnings of the democracies is radicalized by what previously had been essentially cultural enemies? If Hamas is printing on Parliament and Big Ben, laser tagging their phrases and having Allah kind of like on the that whatever that Ferris wheel thing is, can you have kind of a moral imperative if if the White House, for instance, is Valerie Jarrett's Iran kind of based sensibilities? I mean, has everything been inverted? Can we fix this Humpty Dumpty?
Scott?
Well, the way I would say that, the way I would respond to it is the people in general in most of these Western countries, and I think it's definitely true in the United States, the people aren't satisfied with this stuff. The people can't stand it. I mean, I think you would have already had a massive wave of, in 2022, when you had the midterm elections in America, they would have been hunting Democrats with dogs all over the country. But for the fact that the Republican Party is in poor odor with Republicans. Donald Trump was blamed for the 2022 elections, but the real culprit was Mitch McConnell. You've got a rejection of the establishment within the opposition party by the opposition's voters. And you have to work through that problem. I think that's certainly is the case in Great Britain, as I see the Tories and what they're going through as well. And they're in a lot better position because Labour is an abject mess in the UK. But in terms of the quality of governance you get, okay, you don't really have quality representation of the working class and the middle class in either America or Great Britain. I mean, I'm certainly going to support Trump. I'm going to vote for the guy. I'm going to write nice things about him. Okay, but Donald Trump is not perfect. The problem is that we need Trump. But we need somebody who's a lot smoother and a lot more professional at this stuff than Donald Trump is, and who can bring something more than messianic suffering on his own right to prove his bona fides, right? Like we need somebody
the problem with Trump, though, is the exact opposite of the one that is declared. The one that's declared by his enemies and by the mainstream media is that he is essentially evil, literally Hitler, and that he's racist, he's sexist, he's, all these kind of bad things by modern values.
And almost all of it projection by his accusers.
Yeah, and that he's going to destroy democracy and all the things that they're actually doing in pursuit of denying Trump the White House.
Right.
But the problem with him is that he's actually too nice, too reasonable, too forgiving. He
was in his first term for sure. That's absolutely cool.
He's a former Democrat who, although he will use salty language, and although he'll be a plain speaker and say that a nation that's a shithole is a shithole, although he will do that, he is actually quite moderate. And this is the problem with Trump, he fights what's wrong, but he forgives the sinners. And we need someone who is less forgiving than he is. Right. And I think that's why the removal of General Flynn was such a vital thing in hamstringing his first term, because Flynn is a colder, harder person than Trump.
Well, and like the best example of what you're talking about, I think, is COVID, right? Very soon after the COVID epidemic popped, and and it was time to like turn the government's full attention toward that pandemic and how to deal with it. Very soon after that, it had to be very obvious in Trump's inner circle where that virus had come from, right? That it had been U.S. government funding at that lab in Wuhan that ultimately led to this. And that path, I mean, was basically a straight line through Anthony Fauci's office. Okay.
True.
The overwhelmingly obvious thing that had to happen at that point, and I mean, the day this stuff became obvious, was that he got fired. And it's, look, we're going to style this as a resignation on your part. And that way I don't have to go public with the fact that this is your virus that's killing all these people. Okay. But you're out. You're gone. And everybody that you mentored up here is gone. I'm cleaning all of you out, and I'm going to bring in my own people to deal with this. And that way I am not going to have some socialist in a freaking lab coat run around and talk about how I'm telling people to inject bleach, right? When I'm touting a procedure that doctors at Cedars-Sinai in LA are pioneering to use UV radiation to disinfect somebody's lungs that has the virus. Like that's where injecting bleach came from. And this had to do with the public health bureaucracy acting as predators against Trump's reelection when they should have been doing their damn jobs, right? Yeah. And this was done because Trump allowed people who were his political enemies that had embedded themselves in the public health bureaucracy and were Barack Obama's people when Barack Obama was already running a shadow government. And this was basically proof of it. Daniel, you're correct. If Trump had been the mean SOB that he needed to be at that point, he would have fired a lot of those guys back in February of 2020 and brought in people from all over the country who weren't invested in these same crap narratives.
Yeah.
And they would have,
that was the end.
I think, I mean, I've seen a discussion of this, why did Trump go along with, I can't remember the source, but why did Trump go along with it? Because his instincts, Trump is always brilliant on his instincts.
Yeah, Trump's instincts,
and his instincts were he didn't like lockdowns. He wanted them gone or never brought in. Right. He wanted ivermectin and other remedies looked at. And he thought
what he wanted to do is he wanted to treat the virus because he knew that, look, unless you've got comorbidity problems, this thing is not going to kill you. So that there's an answer to this, which is if you get sick, let's get you well. Not let's destroy the country and the economy and my re-election chances. Let's get you well.
The thing that seems to be a convincing argument to me is that basically the kind of sources working against Trump within the White House and especially within the intelligence community. And we know how much the intelligence community was invested in getting rid of Trump. The signed letter by 50 intelligence experts, all the rest of it. They were deeply invested in getting rid of Trump. And it's only a theory, but it's one that seems convincing to me. The idea that why did Trump turn and why did he start listening to Fauci and trusting these people and going with them? The idea is that the intelligence community told him that this was a Chinese bioweapon and he would have to go along with these people and they'd have to act super fast. And if he did that, he would save millions of American lives from a Chinese bioweapon. And I think that is probably something of that nature happened. And,
in the background, I was putting up my Fauci article from last year. Dr. Fauci's own gain of function. That's pretty much the essence of it. I posit that the real virus, the real item to be eradicated was Donald Trump, and we performed basically a granuloma. To get rid, you don't really get rid of tuberculosis. You encapsulate it, so forth. And I think this was what the so many things that happened. There were, a lot of it was covering the ass of Dr. Fauci et al. Because they were complicit, and so a lot of they ignored the Diamond Princess. So that's a whole nother story. I don't want to spend our time here on it. But I think everything else that happened was just to get the mail-in ballots and remove Trump. And Trump was the real offending infectious agent that had.
I think Deborah Birx's book pretty much spells that. She didn't mean to do it, but she spelled that out pretty much in detail. That this is exactly what the entire exercise was about. So yeah.
We're kind of rounding out the hour. I want to make best use of our time. I want to show people your books so they can find them and buy them and send you guys money. So this is The Gates of Hell, why Bill Gates is the most dangerous man in the world. I mean, there's going to be some competition here because we have
there's a lot of people competing for that title.
Yeah, because we have along the red theme here, we have racism, revenge, and ruin. And it's all Obama. So you guys are going to have to fight this out to see. I didn't put them up on the page here. So here's Racism, Revenge, and Ruin. That's Scott McKay's book. And over here we have The Gates of Hell, why Bill Gates is the most dangerous man on earth. So I'd recommend people buy those. And as a little bit of a plug, they want when they're hanging around Amazon, they can go buy my book. It's unrelated to this, but it is. I was covering this pandemic before the other one popped up, and I actually had an article in 2019 about Zika and the pandemic that never was, and how people kind of bought into this. And it's a little bit like the psyops that we've seen go on with climate and whatnot. There were a lot of radical reasons that Zika became the pandemic it was. It was talked up by the left, so they kind of used it as a Trojan horse to get rid of the Brazil's stricter abortion laws than the NGOs and whatnot left want to see in the world. So the last vestiges are certain countries in that so-called third world that still have caveats against and strict constraints against abortion. And so because there was the microcephaly element, they kind of jumped on the bandwagon to promote this concept of Zika microcephaly so they could overturn the abortion laws on an emergency basis. And it's always emergencies. So we have to watch out for those. So I think this is I'll grade this as an interesting discussion. I give it an A, and because I'm grading on the modern curve, perhaps, but maybe not. I extend an invitation.
I'm just disgusted that we didn't get an A star. I'm absolutely revolted.
You guys got to work with it. But I know Scott has to take off, and so I very much appreciate your time. Any final words for our audience?
Well, we've talked about some rather heavy topics here and a little on the depressing side. I would suggest getting King of the Jungle because it makes fun of all these people in savagely humorous ways. It'll be available on Amazon on the 12th of April, which is 4 days from the day we recorded this podcast. Leave us a review. Tell us what you think.
All right, perfect. So just going to pop up the King of the Jungle. This is your spectator page, and this is what we have here. So people can go check this out. All the episodes are up on Spectator if they want to binge read now before the April 12th outflow. And Daniel, any final words?
No, just probably one copy of my book isn't enough. You probably need one for the bathroom, one for guests. But other than that, no, it's been very interesting meeting Scott and chatting with Scott as well.
Yeah, and you can find Daniel's excellent words at Jupplandia. They're not just great words; it's actually how he puts them together.
The sequence does matter.
Thank you both for coming along. Appreciate the ride, the hayride, as it were, and hope to see you guys again.
Cheers,
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks very